Well, thank you all so much for being here. This is an amazing process. You guys are the driving force behind allocations, or sorry, we've changed it. It's citizens review, not allocations anymore. You're the driving force of making sure that we're vetting the nonprofits and giving them the good housekeeping seal of approval. So thank you all for doing that. Our mission is to increase the organized capacity for people to care for one another in the Tri-County area. And one of the focuses is health, education, and income. So those are the important things that we focus on. So when you're looking at these agencies, that's what they specialize in. But United Way, we don't focus on just one issue. We focus on all of the issues, and that's why our partner agencies are so important. They're coming together to find solutions in our community, and that's part of this process. You get to learn a lot about the nonprofit community and what they do, but no, they all work together to make the community a stronger place. So I'm not going to talk long. I'm going to introduce Terry Arts. Terry Arts is the princess of Citizens Review. No, goddess. We're changing a lot of titles. I was having a hard time of, are we income, or are we saying prosperity today? So please know there are a lot of changes going on at United Way, and we're really excited about it. So here's Terry Arts.
I am the only princess of my own tiny little kingdom, but I am delighted to be part of the United Way process. I think what we've decided is I am going to be a facilitator. That's what I'm calling myself. When I look around the room and I see all of you, I am just so pleased that you're here, whether it's your first year or in some of your cases maybe 15, 20 years involved with this process. So I'm going to ask you to do something, and I might need to offer you a writing utensil if you don't have one. Just on your agenda, your meeting agenda, if you would jot down, and this is for you, I'm not going to ask you to share them, but if you would jot down why you are here, why are you a volunteer, or what do you expect out of participating in this process. So just take a minute, not going to ask you to share them, and then I'm going to tell you how I started with this process.
You guys are a group of overachievers. You almost all had pens. Very studious group. Yes.
Okay, so way back when, and I believe it was either 1999 or 2000, one of those two, my boss at the time came to me and said, Terry, I've been involved with United Way for a very long time, and I'm going to be transitioning out, and now you are going to become involved with United Way. That is what you would be referring to as the voluntold part of volunteering. I really did not know much about United Way. I'd heard of it. I knew that it existed. I had no idea at that time how much it is driven by you all at the local level. And once I discovered that, I became very enthusiastic about what United Way does. So that was kind of the beginning of my involvement. And this, I have to say, is my very favorite part of the process, where we have an opportunity to review our partner agencies or prospective agencies, talk about what they do in the community or what they would like to do in the community, and be a driving force in recommendations as pertains to their funding or their partnership with United Way. So that is kind of it in a nutshell. But I wanted to share with you, and these may look like what you wrote down on your piece of paper, why people volunteer. My initial reason was not very lofty, was it? I was sort of told that I was going to take that opportunity. Here's some other reasons that you might have written down, why you volunteered or what you expect to get out of it. Be part of a team because you were asked. I have a hunch that that is why a lot of you are here. Nothing wrong with that. Connect with your community, contribute to a cause you care about, do something different from your day job, donate your professional skills, feel involved, feel needed. Guess what? It's not just that you will feel involved and needed, you are involved and you are very much needed. Find a purpose, gain leadership skills, get out of the house, give something back, impress your mom, make a difference, repay a debt. And I think what that could mean is maybe you yourself or a family member or a close friend has benefited from what our United Way partner agencies do, and you want to give something back in that regard. To have an impact, use your skills in a productive way, or verify progress, outcomes, and money well spent. So, for example, if you're a donor to the United Way, this is a very, very good ground roots way to discover how your money is best utilized. So, for all of those reasons, thank you for being here. I'm very, very excited about some changes in our process, and specifically as we talk about reviewing our agencies. Katie has been a big driver in that process, and she is going to talk about what that means.
Yeah. Okay, there we go.
All right, so I'm going to flip through the first few slides here. So I'm the marketing specialist at the United Way, but I did a presentation in a Carroll College classroom this morning. I'm in their grant writing class, and you know, people at nonprofits wear a lot of different hats. So my other hat is to organize the citizen review process as well. So Allison had mentioned that United Way focuses on 3 areas: education, financial stability, prosperity, income. We can't decide what word's best. If you guys have feedback, please let me know. Health, and then basic needs, right? So think food, shelter, and things like that. So all the organizations that you'll be reviewing through this process focus on one of these 4 things, or they should focus on one of those 4 things. We've had to restructure things a little bit this year, and I'll talk about that a little bit down the line, but you will be reviewing new applicants, people that are currently not United Way partners, so people that aren't currently listed in this brochure who want to become United Way partners in the future. So that will be on your plate this year. So keep that in mind when we're going through everything. And then, what way are we going here? This was not well thought out as far as where this is. And so one of the other things as you're going through and reviewing these organizations to think about is that organizations are really doing one of these 3 things, right? They're providing help when people are at their most vulnerable. Those are the food shares, the friendship centers, the God's Love organizations. There's also organizations that are opening doors of opportunity for people, maybe Westmont, or organizations that are providing work for developmentally disabled individuals. And then there's ones that are investing in preventative services, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Big Brothers, Big Sisters. And oftentimes when you're reviewing, you might get stuck on this providing help when people are at their most vulnerable, right? Those are really, really compelling applications to meet, and they're really, really, really important services here in our community. But if we don't have people that are investing in preventative services, and if we don't have people that are providing the opportunities people need to fulfill their lives, then we're going to end up with more people that are having to invest their resources in helping people that are in really vulnerable positions. So keep that in mind as you're looking at the different applications. The panels have been organized this year in a very diverse manner. So you will see probably an income-based organization, an education-based organization, and a health-based organization on your panel. And so you're going to see them addressing all of these things, and keep that in mind when you're reviewing them, that these people who are vulnerable definitely need help, but we also have to invest in other types of services as well in our community. All right. Okay. And so one of the major changes this year that we made was with the application. So for the people who have done it before in the past, for people who have done it before in the past, we've had 1 application, right? Pretty straightforward. You filled it out, and then you reviewed all the same information. However, we really began to understand that we were funding 2 things. We were funding programs at organizations, and we were funding organizations, the larger overarching picture. So we broke it up into 2 applications. There's the program funding and the organization funding. The people who applied for program funding have a very specific program that they're asking for. The YWCA, for instance, applied for their transitional living shelter for women and children. That's definitely a program. On the organization funding side, Broadwater County Social Services, for instance, uses United Way funding to fund a bookkeeper, right? That is not the sexiest thing to provide funding for, but that is so needed for that organization because they receive Ted Turner funding in larger amounts, and they have to have the financial practices to be able to receive that funding. So by providing that organization funding for that bookkeeper, we enable them to do so much more in the towns and community. And so that would be an organization that applied for organizational funding. We've asked the people who want organizational funding to focus on how the United Way funding is enabling them to do other things in the health, income, basic needs, and education areas. Does that make sense to everybody? That there's those 2 different applications? For the sake of review, we've broken it up. So your panel will either only be looking at program funding, or they'll be looking at organization funding. The one difference comes down to when we have these new applicants, right? They had to do the same thing as well, and a lot more applied for organization than program. And so there's some panels that might have a new applicant that is in a different pool. So you'll see that when you get the applications and read them, but just be conscious the entire time that if they apply for a program, that's all you really need to evaluate them on, is that specific program that they're seeking funding for. Any questions? That's kind of confusing. It was confusing for the applicants. And so you might see some kind of wonky answers in this first year, so take that into consideration. But I think in the long run, it will really help us understand what United Way money is going to support, whereas before it was a little bit questionable in some situations. I should have gotten a clicker, right? Smart. I don't think we have one. Oh my gosh. Okay. So again, there's current United Way partner agencies. All 31 of them are listed in the brochure. And then we have prospective United Way partners. We got 15 applications this year. If anybody's familiar with the United Way application process, last year we got 2. The year before we got 1 new application, and then this year we have 15 organizations in the Tri-County area that want to be part of United Way. And we think that that's really exciting. It shows that people are seeing value in the organization, they want to be a part of it, but it also makes this process a lot more complicated. So I really appreciate those of you who filled out the conflict of interest form for a second time with those additional organizations to make sure that we can get you on appropriate panels where you don't have any conflicts of interest. Anybody have questions about the current versus prospective? We'll talk about the different questions that you're going to ask these guys compared to those guys a little later on. Is there anything with that? All right.
So Kay, I'm assuming we use the same criteria for current and prospective applicants when we go through this?
Yep, it's basically going to be the same scoring rubric. We'll go through the scoring. There were some questions that were not asked of new applicants. For instance, you'll see that they did not have to fill out a logic model because, as we talk about this, they're not going to receive any funding until July of 2017, right? So we don't need to see their outcomes because they're not going to receive any funding for a full year out. So I'll explain that a little bit here. Most of you who have done this before are probably familiar with some United Way lingo, but for those of you who are new, it can be a little bit confusing. So United Way has donor designated dollars, which is money that if you donate to the United Way, you say, I want my money to go to YMCA and Food Share and Peers, right? And then United Way takes that money and gives it directly to those partner agencies. The United Way Community Impact Fund dollars, however, are when you just say, I'm going to donate to the United Way, and I trust the United Way through the process that you guys are all participating in to connect those dollars to the areas of need in our community. And so that's really what you're looking at in this process with the former applicants, right? So the majority of folks, you're going to be saying, how much of this community impact pot of money should they receive based on their application and their agency interview. The new people, however, are not eligible for any of this in the first year, right? The only thing that they're applying for is to be on our brochure, which is probably going to look a little bit different next year, but on our brochure to receive donor designated funds in next year's campaign. So you're vetting them not to get any community impact dollars, you're simply vetting them to become a United Way partner agency, to get that good housekeeping stamp of approval, and to be on our marketing material in our next year's campaign. So the questions do vary a little bit, right? You're really going to want to hone in on, are they aligning with our mission in income, education, and health and basic needs, and do they have the capacity to adequately manage their finances? You won't be looking at any requests for community impact funds. Yes, Marianne?
Is there a maximum number of organizations that you will take on? As long as they qualify, you'll bring everybody aboard?
It's a board of directors decision at that point. So we're going to take all the information collected by you guys, which is why it's so important to have comprehensive feedback on these agencies. Board members will be invited to every single new agency meeting. So you're going to be with your panels, right, of about 6 to 7 people, but board members might show up at those meetings to vet those agencies as well. Another thing, now that I'm talking about who might else show up at your meeting, just so I don't forget, we have a great partnership with Carroll College this year. and a grant writing class, seniors and juniors. It's part of their requirements to come to one of the meetings. And so there's about 25 students in the class, and a maximum of 3 of them will show up at your meeting at any one time, and they're just there to observe and learn about the grant making process. So heads up to all volunteers that some students might be coming around to your agency interviews as well. So does that make sense when looking at what funding people are going to get? The combined the federal combined campaign, the CFC and the State of Montana Employees Charitable Giving Campaign are other workplace giving campaigns right in the federal government and state of Montana. So that funding is put into the equation when we distribute funds, but that's not something that you guys have to worry about. It's just put into the equation. Is this going different ways every time I touch it? I feel like I should know by now. And so here's this is the picture that we're looking at, and this, I mean, on Wednesday the 16th, when I had 40-something applications sitting in my office, I was like, oh my gosh, this has never happened before. But this is what the breakdown looks like. We have 4 donor-designated fund applications. That means that organizations, they don't want any of those community impact dollars, right? They're previous organizations, but they don't want community impact funds, they just want donor-designated funds. Those 4 organizations are Catholic Social Services, the Salvation Army, Career Training Institute, and Lewis and Clark Public Health Cancer Screening Program. And so you guys won't be looking at those agencies this year. They have a little less stringent review process, and we will be doing that in-house with board members and panel chairs. So that, again, changed how we made the panels. We have 9 program funding applications, 16 organization funding applications, and these 15 prospective applicants. And so that's the breakdown. You guys all filled out the conflict of interest form so you know who applied, but a really diverse group of new applicants this year. Does anybody have questions before we start going through the changes with the actual review process? We're just going to kind of go through it question by question, or part by part, essentially, because this is a big change to have a review document. For people who haven't done it in the past, before why you made the decisions you did about the agencies. So there's 2 parts to it. One part is reading the application at home. You can do it in your pajamas. You can do it however and wherever you want. The second part is going out to the agencies with your panel and interviewing them. We'll talk a little bit about the chain of communication and how you get those meetings set up kind of at the end of the presentation. But can everybody turn to well, I think if I were you, I don't have an application. I'm kind of winging it. I created it, so I should know it, but we'll see how that goes. But I would have your application out and then your review document right next to it so you can see side by side what's going on. And so each section has points assigned to it, right? You can score 0 to whatever the maximum points are based on how you feel they completed the application. Again, do this before you go see the agency. Some agencies are really, really good at pulling on your heartstrings and really good at telling you stories, and that's awesome, and we should definitely take that into consideration. But they also need to be good about justifying what they're using the money for and articulating the need and why they're doing what they're doing. So part 1 is agency information. You see that on the front page. It's like their address, name, all of that jazz. It's kind of like the SAT. They either filled it out or they didn't fill it out. They get 0 points or they get 2 points. Based on whether they completed it or not. So go through, look, and see if they answered all the questions. You'll also see on that, you'll also see on that page that's where they show you how much money they want. And I know I'll have questions, and this is a pretty fresh, new group of folks, but for people who have done it before, panel members aren't going to be discussing dollar amounts. It's simply going to be a percentage that you feel that they received. The panel chairs and the board of the directors will be looking at the dollar amounts. You're just scoring them and giving them, a C or a B or an A or whatever your point scoring comes out to be. So again, 0 or 2 points, but you can see how much they're asking for, right? That's important to understand, is their funding request justified, right? If they say they're going to, provide 100 coats for kids, right, but they want $20,000 to provide 100 coats, right, then there's a major problem there. So definitely look at that amount because it matters, but just know that you won't be making any decisions regarding that specific amount that that agency is going to receive. Any questions on part 1? Pretty straightforward. Okay, part 2 is agency governance. This section, we're trying to get at the board of directors and do they have a solid governance structure for their board. It's 5 points, so you can go 0 to 5. We provided some basic guidelines, take a look at it. Things to look for, right? Is there nepotism on their board? Is the board all in the family, essentially? And if it is, maybe that's something you need to explore, right? Or do they not have a system for rotation of board members? There's a few questions there that you can ask them questions about if you feel that they're not answered appropriately. One of the questions on there is regarding whether or not they attend board trainings annually. If there's a typo, it's supposed to be at least annually. And so we said, if not, why not? And we're not docking people necessarily if they don't attend board trainings annually, but that's why we always ask the if not, why not. We want to hear from them why it's not occurring. And if it's not occurring for their board because they don't know about trainings, they don't have money for trainings, or some situation like that, that's on United Way to say that 50% of our partners need board governance training, and that's something that we can help provide to them, but this is a really good mechanism for us to find out about our partners' needs. So you'll see on the thing, that would be a perfect situation to write maybe recommendations, no points deducted, right? So if there's some best practice things that you see that they're not doing, but you don't want to dock them because they're an all-volunteer run organization, and you know, it's probably not their bad that they're not doing annual board trainings because they don't have the capacity, then just make note of that in the recommendations. But be sure in the strengths and weaknesses to articulate why you gave them what you did. If you gave them 2 points, they should have a number of weaknesses noted on this section. This information is compiled and given to them. So be thoughtful about what you say, right? We've had some kind of harsh comments in the past, and those are okay. We wordsmith them a tad before they go out the door to the agencies. But just be thoughtful and provide constructive feedback whenever you can, because that's what really helps organizations grow. I wish United Way would go through this process almost, right? So I could get that feedback on how we can improve our programs and our grant writing and things like that. So let's see here. So agency governance, I know a lot of you in the room sit on boards, you know all about board governance. But board members are the fiduciaries who steer the organization toward a sustainable future by adopting sound, ethical, and legal governance and financial management policies, making sure the nonprofit has adequate resources to advance its mission, right? And these are kind of the core duties, right? Duty of care, duty of loyalty, and duty of obedience. If you want to learn more about this, Montana Nonprofit Association has great resources on their website. But really looking into the organization, is this a board that's just there because a 501c3 nonprofit has to have a board, or are they actually an active board that's steering the organization in the right direction? Any questions on board governance basics? Okay. So the part 3 is the budget. This is where you're going to see the largest difference between organization and program funding, right? Program funding people, they just provided a program budget. You're not going to see their whole organization's budget. For people who have done this before, think Rocky Mountain Development Council, and think about their multi-million-dollar budget that they have to operate it, and think about retired senior volunteer programs, very small budget in that larger picture. In this scenario, you're just going to see RMDC's, or Rocky Mountain Development Council's retired senior volunteer program budget. You'll be informed of, in a later question, what their overall operating budget is, so you can see how that fits into their overall picture, but you're not going to see their full budget. So that's where the biggest difference comes in. Versus an organization, you're going to see their entire organization. The next difference is, in new applicants, you're just going to see a projected budget. You're not going to see where United Way money is going to be spent, because we don't know if they're going to get any donor-designated funds, right? They could be admitted as a United Way partner agency, and no one can give them funds. So we can't tell them to tell us where they're going to spend those funds. We just need to know what program or if it's going to their organization. Does that make sense for those? Okay. But on the United Way current partners, they should tell us now, which has not happened in the past, what line items they're spending their budgets on. So if an organization says they're buying coats, and then they decide to, their heater breaks and they decide to fix their heater at their nonprofit, we need to know, and we are now asking them to tell us, if you spent it on something different than you said you were in your application, give us notification and we're going to approve that. So that's an additional layer of accountability that nonprofits are going to have going forward. So with the budget, one thing that always gets brought up, right, is this issue of nonprofit overhead, which is, everybody's probably heard the different thoughts about what percent a nonprofit should have in its overhead to be considered a good nonprofit. There's been a big movement away from that. Dan Pallotta does a great talk on TED Talks. It's like 20 minutes. I spared you guys tonight. But talking about how the way we think about charity is dead wrong, and how, ask a charity if it has instead of asking if they have low overhead, ask them if they have big impact. And looking at not just that percent as the only measure of an agency's efficacy, looking at other things as well. So be conscious of this when you see organizations that might have a little higher overhead than you think that they should. And on the same note, be cautious if you see an organization that says they have no overhead, because we guarantee you there's not a single nonprofit, other than maybe a few all volunteer run ones, but that's probably unlikely, that has zero overhead, right? They're sending mail, they're doing things. So be really cautious of that when you're looking at it. Zero overhead is equally as alarming as a high overhead amount. But again, watch that Dan Pallotta TED Talks. Susan Hay-Patrick, the United Way CEO out of Missoula County, used to do a segment on Montana Public Radio about nonprofits, and she also has an excellent story in Montana Public Radio about Missoula nonprofits and trying to get away from this kind of obsession in the United States about nonprofit overhead. Does anybody have questions about that? No? Okay. But those two resources definitely will give you a new perspective maybe on how to look at that when you're looking at these budgets. Part 4 is fiscal capacity and finances. Again, 0 to 5 points. Huge change in what we require people to submit this year. Last year, they had to submit every financial document under the sun. We had like 120-page applications coming in. That's not the case this year. Everyone was required to submit their 990. Every nonprofit is required to file a 990 with every 3 years. Some nonprofits, if it's under $50,000 in revenue, file a 990N, which is a very abbreviated form of a 990. You're going to see a few of those with the new applicants, but most everybody else should have filed a Form 990 within the last 3 years and attached that. That should really give you a good idea of their finances. If for any reason you want to see their full audit, if they were required to do an audit, our threshold is above $250,000 in revenue every year. Let your panel chair know. Your panel chair will let Terry know. Terry will let me know, and we'll let the organizations know. We'll talk about the chain of communication, but please do not reach out to the organization directly to request anything from them. One question on that application you'll see was, did they put it online, their audit? And if they've uploaded their audit online, which we love every nonprofit partner to do, they'll check yes, and then you can go view that audit. It will be on their website. Any questions on fiscal capacity and finances? If you have any questions, if you like looking at a 990 and it makes no sense, or how I feel when I look at a 990, talk to your panel chair, and we will definitely connect you with some resources or somebody to actually sit down and walk through the different sections of a 990 with you so that you better understand it.
Is that a question really for 2014? Or should it be 2013?
Most nonprofits, at this point, people are getting their 990s back, but it was a little bit questionable when people were submitting their applications. People were just getting the final signatures on their 990s, and like our, United Way, we're just finishing up ours now. Yeah. One other question on there that I think is really important to point out is this issue of money in the bank, right? Nonprofit reserves. People have different feelings about how much money nonprofits should have in savings. I think everybody agrees that nonprofits should have something in savings, right? It's just like a business or a household. You should have a rainy day fund. General guidelines say 3 to 6 months of expenses, but that totally depends based on the revenue streams of the organization. So some organizations that are really dependent on fluctuating grant contracts might want to have more money in the bank than organizations that have fee for services and know that they're going to have a steady client stream for the next year and receive that funding. And so really looking at the organization, what they're doing, and how much money they should have in the bank is important, and not just having one strict guideline for all organizations. At the high end, reserves should not exceed 2 years of your budget, right? Kind of a red flag if you got a ton of money in the bank and you're just sitting on it and not doing anything. Some exceptions for that would be capital campaigns and things like that, so definitely looking into that. And then at the low end, you should be able to cover payroll for a little while at your nonprofit. This is not the most, from my perspective, right, somebody who's not good at finances, this is the most important section, but that's not the case, right? This is my favorite section. On a scale of 0 to 5, please indicate how they justified their use of the funds, taking into consideration alignment with our focus areas, plans for sustainability, and demonstrated collaborative efforts. These are the questions that we ask them to describe what they're doing, why they're doing it, how they're doing it, how they plan to continue doing it in the future, who they're serving, and so on. One question that we added this year was to describe why they need the funding. We had asked it in the past, but in some different ways. And we really want organizations to increasingly describe why this funding is important. Is it by providing statistics, right? Sometimes in the nonprofit world, we assume that everybody knows why we need the money. But I think even people in this room would be shocked to hear, for instance, that child abuse and neglect cases of removals from homes are increasing 35 to 40% a year in our community, right? Those are the kinds of things that we're confronting in this community, and not everybody knows it. And so really encouraging the organizations to articulate why this funding is needed is important. Same goes for organizations that serve individuals with developmental disabilities. There's some assumption that we understand that there's additional challenges or opportunities needed for those individuals, but if they don't tell us why, how do we know? And so talking to the organization about why these needs are important is something that we're going to place increasing emphasis on going forward. Something else in the application, I think it's number 10, sorry, I don't have it in front of me, but is talking about how they align with the United Way focus areas. That's something that's going to become, again, increasingly important as we make some changes to our funding model. How are they, and how do they see themselves aligning with health, income, and education? You'll see it's super broad, right? Education can be mentoring, it can be lifelong learning, it can be many, many different things under our current definition. Those are going to tighten up a little bit, and we want people to be able to justify how their programs fit what we're doing and actually advance what we're doing in the community. Does anybody have questions about that section? Sustainability was also added this year. That's something very common in state and federal grant applications, but we know especially with organizations that might have one staff member and maybe it's the founder of the nonprofit that there needs to be some plan in place for when that person is no longer there. So for them to share that with us, I think will be very informative. Oh man, this is my second presentation today and my throat is getting a little scratchy here. Part 6 is the logic model. For people who work in the grant world, right, logic models are very common across many different grant applications. Oh, thank you. State, federal, but essentially, and it looks kind of weird, right? You're like, why can't you just ask them this question and say, what's your baseline service? What's your desired goal? How are you going to measure it? But the reason that we put it into a logic model is it's really a tracking tool, and it's what we're going to use for applicants to start reporting back to us. And so they're going to say, here's what we're doing now. RMDC, home delivered meals, we serve 50,000 meals a year now. We want to serve 52,000 meals a year later. That's not a very good program. And we're doing it by counting how many meals go out our door every day. And we're going to ask them 6 months down the road in November to report back on those outcomes and outputs that they said that they are going to achieve. Another change, it's not really relevant to you guys, but in the past, many of our partner agencies had their evaluation when you guys came around. And that can be really scary for an organization if something happened during the year or something like that. So they're gonna do reporting now at 6 months, which I think is, again, just a best practice in grant making, to tell us how things are going, to be able to make adjustments if they hit some bumps in the road along the way. So the logic model's kind of funky. One other thing to take into consideration is some organizations have this really easy. If you're if you're Meals on Wheels, that's really easy to count how many meals that you're sending out the door. If you're big brothers, big sisters, you can count how many mentors you matched up or how many background checks you did on potential matches. Youth homes, for instance, right? It's much harder to measure how many kids are finding safe haven at your facility. And even if you are measuring that, do you want that to go up or do you want that to go down, right? You don't want to say that you're going to serve more kids because ideally the need is going down. And so be conscious that some organizations really, really struggle with the logic model. And you put that in the recommendation. If it made no sense to you, share that it made no sense. But if they made an effort at it, I think you have to give them some credit because it is a very challenging tool for some organizations. Yes?
If we don't understand, let's say we read our paper, we go to the agency, is it appropriate for us to say at that time to the organization,
Yeah.
I don't really, it's not really clear, can you explain a little bit more?
Yeah, and they might be able to articulate it a little bit better rather than the boxes that are provided.
But that's appropriate for us to ask.
Yeah,
at that
I think
time.
that's definitely an appropriate question. And hopefully that goes into the agency thing, which is next. The agency interview. It's everybody's favorite part, right? You get to go and talk to people and they're much better at generally describing what they do and why they do it than they can by writing it. But we also need to take into consideration that some agencies have a ton of capacity and really nice facilities and do presentations like this all the time. And some agencies are all volunteer run and their one staff member is terrified of public speaking and they never have to do it in their, in their job. This is way outside of their swim lane. And so I think Terry described it as a job interview, right? Some people are like really awesome at job interviews, but others aren't. And so we knew we have to continue to do the agency interview, but we have to look at other things as well, and that's why we introduced the scoring rubric for the application. So the interviews will go exactly how they have in the past. We've weighted it at 10 points. So you'll see that it is weighted more than other portions of the application. But look at the applicant's preparedness. Even if you're a small volunteer-run group, you should be prepared for the interview, right? That doesn't take a lot to come and be professional and show up on time. Applicant's ability to respond to questions, same thing. You should be familiar with your organization and what you're doing, the finances and things like that. And then your ability to demonstrate their need for the funding. These are very basic expectations that no matter what the size of the organization, they should be able to come prepared to address these things at the agency interview. And if they can't, then maybe that's where you reduce some points. They all know that people are coming. The one thing to caution is the new agencies, right? Florence Crittenton has been doing this since
Way back.
decades and decades and decades, right? Some of these agencies are pros at this process. These new agencies will have never done it before. So definitely take that into consideration as you go and interview them, that this is the first time. They might not know all the protocols and things like that, some of the agencies that have been partners since, 1940 do know, so. Does anybody, that's kind of the application in a nutshell. When you get to the end, you'll see that you just tally up your points. It's 25 points if you didn't attend the interview, right? We want everybody to attend the interviews if they can, but we know things happen and we know people can't make the interview. So you can't score them, right, based on those 10 points if you weren't there. So just fill out your score at 25 points. And if you did do the interview, out of 35 points. On the back end, when we compile everything, Terry did some fancy formulas in Excel for us, and so it all works out with the weights and stuff like that on the back end. So you just fill it out, and then you're just going to give this sucker to your panel chair. If your panel chair would probably appreciate it being online and typed, but you can write it out, and if any panel chairs are in the room freaking out by the number of things that they're going to have to type up and enter, let us know. We have great help in the office.
It's a very simple solution. Put it in yourself.
Huh?
It's a very simple solution. put it in yourself.
Me?
I mean, not you.
Oh.
Not you. No, definitely not Katie. No, but the panel members.
Yeah,
If you set it up right through something like Google Docs.
yep. And we can talk, so
Minimal
Google,
impact.
yep, exactly. And Google Docs is a tool that we're gonna have out there for panel chairs. Each of you, again, will be placed on a panel with a panel chair. How many of you are in the room? Jim is a panel chair, Roger, Darla, and Sharon are all panel chairs. In addition to that, oh man, this is gonna tax my memory, we have Brad Lancaster, Connie Christofferson, Jacob Johnson, Steph Heisted, and Emily Fleming. And there's one more. Oh, Pat Christian from Carroll College. And so 10 chairs total, 10 panels total. So yeah, to relieve the burden on them, that would be awesome. They're gonna have access to Google Docs. If they choose to use Google Docs, you guys will have access to the Google Docs as well. You could upload things into your file and mess around. Some chairs might not be comfortable with Google Docs, in which case you'll be getting things just sent to you via email and have to respond that way. Yes?
Can I add something more
Yes.
about thinking about Google and thinking
Yeah.
about the web? On this agency information on part 5 and 6, is part of our due diligence to look at these agencies, to look at their website before you go do the interview. It's relevant and current. Without naming the agency, there was one agency that my panel interviewed last year that had national affiliation, and they had a national requirement to have certain information on their website. Well, it didn't match what they were asking for on the paperwork. So that begets a further conversation of why that disparity. So we really need to make sure that the information that they're putting out on social media and the web stuff on their specific website is accurate.
But I'll add a qualifier to that, is be cautious that you're not letting that sway your entire judgment, right? At the organization, you're really looking at what they're applying for here, what they're saying in the interview, and you can ask about things like that, but be very cautious that that we're really looking at what they have on paper and what they're saying in the interview. Because that does vary too. Broadwater County Social Services doesn't have a website, all volunteer led, right? And if you go in saying, well, they must not do good work because they don't have a website. How could you do good work without a website? And if that's your preconceived notion going in, then that's definitely going to sway what you hear. So yeah, definitely learn about the organizations, and we all know these organizations, right? It's Helena, we know.
But don't judge them by it.
Yeah, we know what they're doing and things like that, but really, have an open mind to what they're writing here and what they're sharing with you at the interview. Because I learn new stuff every year about what people are doing and what they're not doing as well. So, any other things on that? Yeah,
So
Darla.
you guys have a kind of an internal technical review anyway, but they're meeting certain requirements, like
Yeah,
the
so
United Way logo and things.
Yep, we introduced a technical review this year as well. It's a back-end thing that we did, but to make it more in line with grant-making best practices, we really want people to turn in their application on time, and we're not going to go ask them for additional information that they did not fill out. They all attended a training, and they had descriptions on what they needed to do, and so we really want them to submit it on time, have all the attachments included. There are a few organizations that you'll probably see that don't have some attachments included, and so take note of that, but also know it was noted on the back end. We had some applications that were turned in late. That was noted on the back end this year, and it will be taken into consideration when they receive their funding. Any other grantor would expect you to get your application in by the deadline. And so, yeah, we had some people, we had Great Falls applicants that couldn't make it down, right? And they figured it out and they did it, right? And so, being creative is sometimes necessary in nonprofits. So this is the communication flow chart, how the communication works. So you guys most of you are volunteers. From today on, basically, although you're going to get some obnoxious emails from me probably about the training on Friday or the availability of the video, but you won't really hear from me anymore in this process. The next person that you're going to receive communication from is your panel chair. That panel chair is going to introduce themselves to you, talk about meeting times and things like that. It's all going to take place via email. If you're not comfortable with email, tell your panel chair. They'll give you a call and we'll figure it out that way. Panel chairs, if you have questions, talk to your panel chair. They might be able to answer them. If they're not able to answer them, they're gonna talk to Terry. If Terry can't answer them, Terry's gonna talk to me. And then if I can't answer it, I'm gonna go to the applicant itself, get the additional audit or whatever the committee is requesting. So really, I'm out of the picture. Your panel chair will be in the picture soon. Again, with the new applicants, everything got kind of turned on its head and we're still trying to get the panels defined. I do have a pretty tentative list, so if you're curious afterwards, we can look at that and I can give you an idea of where you're gonna be at. Just keeping these degrees of separation. One thing that we do have coming up, where you will see me again and the whole United Way staff, is the Treasure Society event. It's on your agenda. It's March 4th, and it's our donor and volunteer appreciation event. It's really our way to say thank you. We know that this is not
May 4th.
May 4th.
Huh?
May.
May? What did I say?
It's on Star Wars
March?
Day.
Oh wow, that already happened. We really would appreciate you. It's free, obviously. It's at Exploration Works, and we'll have wine and snacks and beer. But it's definitely a time just to come, and donors will be there as well. We get the Ron Waterman Spirit of Service Award to an outstanding volunteer in our community, and we'd just really like to see you guys there. Because, you know, United Way is all about donating and giving your money, but the other side of that is volunteering. We know that your time is just as valuable as your funding. And so really appreciate you being part of this process. And the last thing I want to do is show you the application scoring scenario here. You're going to get an Excel, and it looks a little bit, oh man, and I have fake numbers in here. Don't pay attention to these like really low scores with fake names these agencies. But essentially you're going to get an Excel, and you just go in and you will write your agency names, and then just go in and tabulate your scores across it, and then submit that to your panel chair, and then they'll combine that, and that's what goes. The reason why this is important primarily is for your comments to be compiled at a later date and sent to the agencies with their funding amounts and things like that. So this will be given to you again either in that Google Doc or via email. For new folks, average funding distributed last year, average award was $14,000 to an agency. The highest I think awarded was around $50,000. Most are in between there. Again, the organizations that only want donor designated funding are lower than that, not receiving those community impact dollars. I don't know the exact, and Allison's gone, I don't know the exact amount of funding distributed last year. I think it was around $450,000 through this process. So there's a lot of money on the table for Helena and staying here locally. I'm not sure exactly what it will be this year, but just know that these decisions are hard and they're important. And we can't give everybody 100%, even though sometimes we'd like to. You really have to be thoughtful about the scores that you're giving the agencies. And it can be hard sometimes to score somebody lower, but sometimes it has to be done because we really have to be looking out for the donor dollar, making sure it goes where it needs to go. So I think that's all I have. I didn't put any contact information and stuff up. Yep. So if you want to contact us, here's our phone number. But again, the panel chair is really that point of contact going forward. Is there any questions whatsoever? I know it's a little bit of a departure from how it looked in the past, but hopefully it'll create more structure. You won't have that final meeting where you're talking about dollar amounts and cringing when you say, I can't get this person $500. That's going to happen, but it's going to happen at the board level and the panel chair level based on your feedback, your combined average scores for all the agencies. It also makes it so it doesn't pit agencies against each other. That has always been a point of tension in the panels. Is, oh my gosh, I love this agency and that agency, but one of them has to get less. So it kind of evens the playing field at a broader level with the organizations. So yeah, anything before we, did I do okay? Is it 6? Oh my gosh, I killed it on time. Yes.